Isaac Boone stopped walking the moment he saw her fall. The wind was cutting down the San Pedro Valley, dry and sharp, carrying a thin scatter of snow that never should have been there. It clung to the ground in broken patches, just enough to show where someone had been stumbling, just enough to prove how far they had already gone on borrowed strength. The young Apache woman dropped to her knees beside the riverbank and did not rise again. Isaac stood several paces away, his rifle heavy in his hands, his breath turning white in the cold. He had learned, years ago, that hesitation could kill a man just as surely as violence. He had also learned something worse, that stepping forward could cost more than walking away. The last time he chose to stay. His wife and child died while he guarded land that could not remember their names. This time, the land watched quietly as Isaac Boone made another choice. Before we continue, please take a moment to support the channel. A simple like, a quick comment, or hitting that subscribe button helps these Wild West tales reach more people who love them. Let me know where you're listening from, and thank you for riding along with us. The San Pedro Valley lay open and exposed beneath a pale winter sky, its wide grasses bent flat by the wind. This was not a land that hid its dangers. It showed them plainly dry riverbanks cut sharp by stone, cottonwoods stripped bare, the ground stiff with frost that would vanish by noon and leave mud in its place. Men who lived here learned early that survival had less to do with luck than with restraint. Isaac Boone had chosen this place because it offered no comfort. His rancho sat far from the nearest trading post, a low structure of timber and packed earth built for function, not permanence. The cattle grazed thin pastures. Water came from the river when it could be trusted. Everything in Isaac's life was measured, rationed, and deliberate. He woke before dawn, worked until the light failed, and slept with the same quiet discipline. That routine had carried him through years he did not speak about. There were signs of a life once shared. A second chair pushed against the wall, unused but never moved. A child's wooden cup tucked into a corner shelf, too worn to throw away, too heavy with memory to touch. Isaac did not look at these things often, but he never pretended they were not there. The two women he carried back to the cabin did not fit into that carefully maintained stillness. The younger one, Nita, barely stirred as he laid her near the hearth. Her hair was dark and tangled, her skin drawn tight with cold, but her face held no softness, even half-conscious. She seemed alert, as if some part of her refused to fully let go. When her eyes opened briefly, they did not plead, they searched. The older woman, Dasan, noticed everything. She tracked Isaac's movements with steady focus, placing herself between him and her sister whenever she could manage it. Her clothing was worn thin from travel, her hands cracked and swollen from cold, yet her posture carried control. This was a woman accustomed to danger, to reading intent before words ever formed. Isaac spoke little. He built the fire higher, set water to warm, and moved with practiced efficiency. He did not ask where they had come from. He did not explain himself. In a land like this, explanations were often used as leverage, and he had no intention of giving any. Outside, the wind continued to scrape across the valley, carrying the last of the night's cold away with it. Inside the cabin, heat began to settle into the walls, slow and reluctant. The space felt altered, not invaded, but unsettled, as if the quiet Isaac had cultivated for years had been forced to acknowledge another presence. As the fire crackled, Isaac became aware of a truth he had avoided since lifting Nita from the riverbank. Bringing them here was not an act that could be undone. Whatever followed would not pass with the melting frost. Night settled slowly over the valley, not with darkness alone, but with sound, the steady push of wind against the cabin walls, the quiet shift of timber as heat worked its way into the beams. Isaac Boone remained on his feet long after the fire had taken hold, moving through the space with the same restraint he brought to every decision that mattered. Nita's condition worsened before it improved. Her breathing grew shallow, uneven, and her skin burned beneath Isaac's hand when he checked her forehead. He had seen fever before. He knew how quickly it could turn from something manageable into something final. He fed the fire, warmed the water, and waited until the heat returned slowly enough to avoid shock. Every motion was careful, every pause deliberate. Dasan watched him without blinking. She had positioned herself near her sister's head, one hand resting lightly against Nita's shoulder, as if anchoring her to the world. When Isaac stepped closer, Dasan's body shifted not aggressively, but decisively, placing a boundary he did not challenge. He understood it. Out here, trust was never given freely, and it was never offered twice. "You can stop," Dasan said at last, her voice low and steady. Not a command, a warning. Isaac lifted his hands a fraction, showing they were empty. "I'm not done yet," he replied. His tone carried no urgency, no insistence, only fact. Dasan studied his face, weighing the words against the man who spoke them. Whatever she saw there did not alarm her, but it did not soften her either. She stepped back just enough to allow him space, never fully removing herself from between him and her sister. For a long while, nothing else was said. The fire cracked softly. Outside, the wind lost some of its edge, settling into a constant, grinding presence. Isaac took a seat against the far wall, far enough to avoid crowding, close enough to respond if Nita's condition shifted again. He kept his rifle leaned against the door, not as a threat, but as habit. Old habits had a way of resurfacing when the night grew long. Nita stirred some time after midnight. It was not a full waking, just a faint movement. A sound caught in her throat as the fever broke unevenly. Isaac stood at once, careful not to rush. Dasan's grip tightened, her eyes sharp with readiness. Nita's gaze found Isaac through the haze, unfocused but searching. Her lips parted, and for a moment it seemed she might speak. Instead, she swallowed and whispered a single word in her own language, the sound thin but deliberate. Dasan answered her softly, brushing hair back from her face. Isaac waited. When Nita's eyes returned to him, clearer now, she did not look afraid. There was exhaustion there, and pain, but also something else, a quiet insistence, as if she were taking measure of him in return. "Why?" she asked at last. The word was rough with effort, but unmistakable. Isaac did not answer immediately. He had learned that explanations offered too quickly were rarely honest. He watched the fire, considered the truth as it existed without justification. "Because you were still breathing," he said finally. The simplicity of the answer seemed to satisfy her. Nita's eyelids fluttered, and she slipped back into a deeper rest, her breathing steadier now. Dasan did not look away from Isaac, but something in her posture eased, just enough to be noticed. Isaac returned to his seat, the weight of the moment settling in his chest. The question lingered longer than the answer had. Why? He knew the land would have accepted his silence just as easily as it had accepted his help. it would not have judged him either way. But as the fire burned low and the night stretched on, Isaac understood that this was not a question the land would answer for him. It was one he would have to live with. Morning came without ceremony. The cold had pulled back from the valley during the night, leaving the ground damp and dark where the thin snow had melted away. A pale light settled over the riverbank, revealing the marks of passage, footprints softened by mud, broken grass bent flat by exhaustion. Signs that 2 lives had nearly slipped past the point of recovery. Isaac Boone stepped outside before the sun cleared the low ridge. He moved quietly, as if the land itself might still be listening. Habit drew him first to the cattle, then to the river, then back to the cabin. Routine had always been his anchor. This morning, it felt altered, stretched around the presence waiting inside. When he returned, the fire had been tended. Dasan knelt near the hearth, adding a piece of wood with careful economy. She glanced up as Isaac entered, acknowledging him with a brief nod before turning back to her work. It was not gratitude. It was recognition of shared vigilance, of a night survived. Nita lay propped on folded blankets, her eyes open now, tracking movement in the room with quiet focus. The fever had receded, leaving her drained but alert. When Isaac set a bowl of warm broth on the table and stepped back, she followed the motion with her gaze, then looked to her sister. Dasan hesitated only a moment before carrying the bowl to her. "You'll drink," she said, not unkindly. Nita managed a faint curve of her mouth and obeyed. Each swallow came slow and deliberate, as if she were teaching her body how to accept help again. Isaac watched from a distance, careful not to intrude. He had learned, through hard experience, that recovery demanded patience more than force. The day passed without conversation. Isaac repaired a loose hinge on the door, sharpened a blade near the window, and split wood until his arms burned. The sounds of work filled the cabin, steady and predictable. Dasan repositioned blankets, checked Nita's pulse, and rationed their few remaining supplies with the precision of someone accustomed to scarcity. It was Nita who broke the silence. "You live far from others," she said, her voice stronger now, though still rough at the edges. Isaac glanced at her, surprised more by the timing than the question. "Far enough." She nodded, accepting the answer as complete. "It is quiet here." Quiet was the point. He replied before he could stop himself. The words settled between them. Nita studied his face not with curiosity, but with recognition. She knew the look of someone who had chosen isolation for reasons that went beyond preference. That afternoon, Isaac showed Dasan where he kept dried herbs and explained their use for lingering cold. He spoke plainly, without instruction or expectation. Dasan listened, committing each detail to memory. When he finished, she inclined her head once. "We will not stay long," she said. It was not a request. It was a boundary. Isaac met her gaze. "I wouldn't expect you to." Nita said nothing, but her fingers tightened briefly in the blanket. Isaac noticed, then turned away, refusing to read meaning where it had not yet earned its place. Over the next 2 days, the rhythm of the cabin adjusted. Nita began to move more, first sitting upright, then standing with care, then taking a few measured steps along the wall. She insisted on helping where she could, sorting dried beans, folding cloth, mending a tear in Isaac's shirt with small, precise stitches. "You don't have to," Isaac told her once. "I know," she replied. "I still will." There was no challenge in her tone, only resolve. Something in that answer stayed with him. It echoed too closely to thoughts he had buried for years, the belief that dignity came not from comfort, but from contribution, watching Nita work. Isaac felt a faint, unfamiliar unease. It was the sense that the life he had narrowed for survival might be widening without his permission. One evening, as the light faded and the wind softened, Isaac and Nita found themselves alone near the table. Dasan had stepped outside to check the weather, her silhouette steady against the dying light. "You didn't answer my question," Nita said quietly. Isaac looked up. "Which one? Why you helped us?" He considered deflecting. Habit urged him to. But something in her patience, her willingness to wait rather than demand, made evasion feel dishonest. "I stayed once," he said at last, "when leaving would have been safer." Nita did not interrupt. "I told myself it was the right choice." He continued, his voice low. "By the time I knew it wasn't, there was nothing left to save." He stopped there. No names, no dates, no plea for absolution. Nita absorbed the words in silence. When she spoke, it was not to console him. "Staying is not always wrong," she said. "Leaving is not always safe." Isaac met her eyes. The simplicity of the truth struck harder than sympathy would have. For the first time in years, he felt seen without being judged. That night, he slept more deeply than he had since their arrival. The change unsettled him. Over the following days, Isaac caught himself watching Nita in unguarded moments, how she paused to rest without apology, how she listened more than she spoke, how she studied the land with the attention of someone who understood both its beauty and its cost. He felt a pull toward her that had nothing to do with desire and everything to do with recognition. It frightened him. He began to withdraw, returning to longer hours outside, speaking less, retreating into the routines that had once kept him alive. Nita noticed. She did not pursue him, did not ask for reassurance. Instead, she spoke plainly when the moment came. "If we stay," she said one morning, "it will be because we choose to, not because we are owed." Isaac stopped what he was doing. He understood the weight of her words. This was not a test. It was a line drawn with care. That evening, as the wind shifted and the first stars appeared, Isaac stood alone near the riverbank. The land stretched out before him, wide and indifferent. He had built his life on the belief that distance could protect him from loss. Now, faced with the quiet presence of a woman who asked for nothing but honesty, he began to understand the cost of that belief. Trust, he realized, was not something that arrived fully formed. It turned slowly, like the season itself, demanding that those who chose it accept the risk of what might follow. The first sign that the valley's quiet had begun to fracture came not with gunfire or raised voices, but with absence. Isaac Boone noticed it when the trader failed to arrive. The man usually passed through every 10 days, sometimes late, sometimes early, but never missing altogether. Isaac marked the days by habit more than need, yet when the trail remained empty beyond its margin of error, he understood what that meant. News traveled faster than horses in places like this. If someone had chosen to speak, the words would already be moving. He said nothing to Nita or Dasan at first. He repaired fence posts, checked the cattle, and kept his routines intact, as if order alone might hold the world in place. But he felt the shift in the air, the way the land seemed to listen more closely than before. It was Dasan who confirmed it. "They know," she said one evening as she came in from the edge of the clearing. Someone spoke. Isaac nodded once. He had expected no less. Nita watched him from across the room, her expression unreadable. She did not ask what would happen next. She already understood that knowledge carried weight, and weight demanded choice. The men arrived 2 days later. There were 4 of them, riding in loose formation. Their horses slowed not by caution, but by confidence. Isaac saw them coming from the ridge and did not reach for his rifle. He stepped out from the cabin instead, positioning himself where he could be seen clearly. The one who rode at the front dismounted first. Caleb Hargreaves was not a large man, but he carried himself as though space belonged to him by default. His coat was better kept than most. His boots polished just enough to signal authority without appearing vain. He smiled when he saw Isaac, a thin expression that never reached his eyes. "Boone," he said, as if they were old friends. "Didn't expect to find you entertaining guests." Isaac did not return the smile. "This is my land." "Is it?" Hargreaves replied lightly. "Depends who's asking." Behind Isaac, the cabin door opened. Dasan stepped out first, placing herself deliberately in view. Nita followed, slower, but no less steady. She stood at the threshold, her back straight, her gaze fixed forward. Hargreaves' smile faded. "There's talk," he said, his voice carrying easily in the open air. "Apache moving through the valley. Trouble following close behind. Folks are concerned." Dasan said nothing. She had already shifted her stance, angling herself so that she could reach Nita in a single step if needed. Isaac felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the instinct to de-escalate, to say as little as possible, to let things pass without drawing attention. It was the same instinct that had guided him for years. He ignored it. "They're not passing through," he said. "They're here because the cold nearly killed one of them." Hargreaves glanced at the men behind him, then back at Isaac. "You're taking responsibility." Then, "Yes." The word landed heavier than Isaac expected. Saying it aloud closed a door he could not reopen. Hargreaves studied him for a long moment. "You know how this looks." "I know what it is," Isaac replied. Silence stretched. The wind moved through the grass, carrying dust and the faint smell of water from the river. "We can't have trouble here," Hargreaves said at last. "If they leave quietly, no one needs to get involved." Dasan took a step forward. "We will leave if we must," she said evenly, "but not because we are told to disappear." Isaac felt the decision settle fully in his body then, like a weight shifting into place. "They stay," he said. "If there's a problem, it's mine." Hargreaves' eyes hardened. "You're choosing sides." Isaac shook his head. "I'm choosing responsibility." That was the moment everything changed. Hargreaves said no more. He mounted his horse and turned away, the others following without comment. But Isaac knew better than to mistake retreat for resolution. Men like Hargreaves did not let challenges stand unanswered. That night, Dasan packed, not in haste, not with fear, but with purpose. She laid out what little they carried, preparing for movement before it was forced upon them. Nita watched her sister in silence, then turned to Isaac. "If we go," she said, "it will not be because of them." Isaac met her gaze. He heard the unspoken truth beneath her words. Staying would require him to stand where he had always chosen to step aside. The following day, word reached Isaac that Hargreaves had taken men south, tracking signs that did not exist. He was determined to prove himself right, to justify the pressure he had applied. The land, indifferent as ever, did not bend to his certainty. The weather turned, not into snow, but into wind, hard, cutting, deceptive by nightfall. A rider arrived at the edge of Isaac's land, breathless and shaken. "Hargreaves is down," the man said. "Horse slipped near the cut rock. He's hurt bad." The rider looked at Isaac with something close to expectation. Isaac did not respond immediately. He felt the old instinct rise again, urging him to stay still, to let consequence follow action. Instead, he reached for his coat. Nita saw the movement and understood at once. "You don't owe him," she said quietly. "I know." Then why Isaac paused, the answer forming without effort. "Because I won't live by leaving things undone anymore." He rode out into the dark alone. Hargreaves lay where the land had claimed him, pinned, injured, furious at his own helplessness. Isaac worked without words, cutting, lifting, binding. He brought the man back alive, though not gently. By morning, the story had spread. Hargreaves survived, but he did not recover his standing. His lies surfaced. His recklessness was witnessed. The men who had followed him no longer spoke his name with respect. In a place where authority lived or died by trust, that was punishment enough. When Isaac returned to the cabin, Nita was waiting. He did not explain himself. He did not have to. The choice had already been made before the land, before the people, and before himself. And this time, he did not turn away. The valley settled slowly after the confrontation, as if the land itself needed time to absorb what had happened. The wind softened, no longer pressing its will against the grass. And the nights grew clearer, colder in a way that felt honest rather than threatening. Life returned to its ordinary rhythms, but nothing moved quite the same as before. Isaac Boone felt the change most keenly within himself. He rose before dawn as he always had, tended the fire, checked the cattle, and walked the edge of the river where frost still clung to the shaded banks. Yet each task carried a new awareness. He was no longer moving only for his own survival. Every decision now reached beyond the narrow circle he had drawn around himself for years. Inside the cabin, Nita was awake when he returned. She sat at the table, sorting dried beans into careful portions, her movements unhurried. Dasan stood near the wall, adjusting the straps on her pack. They did not speak at first. Isaac set his coat aside and poured water into the kettle. The sound of it heating filled the space between them. He understood, without being told, that this moment could not be postponed. Silence had served them well until now. It would not carry them further. "I won't ask you to stay," Isaac said at last. Nita looked up, her expression steady. She did not seem surprised. "I wouldn't stay if you did." The honesty of the exchange eased something tight in his chest. He nodded once. "If you remain here, it will be because you choose it, not because you need shelter, not because I feel responsible." Dasan's eyes flicked toward him, measuring the words with the same precision she had applied to every action since their arrival. Whatever she saw satisfied her enough to keep listening. "This land isn't easy," Isaac continued. "It doesn't forgive mistakes. And it doesn't promise safety, no matter how careful a man is." Nita folded her hands together. "Nothing worth choosing does." The answer carried no bravado. It was a statement of fact, born of experience rather than optimism. Dasan stepped forward then, her pack settled firmly on her shoulder. "I will not stay," she said, "not because this place is unsafe, because my work here is finished." Nita turned to her sister, concern flickering across her face before settling into understanding. "You don't have to go yet." "I do," Dasan replied gently. "You no longer need me to stand between you and the world." Isaac felt the weight of those words more than he expected. He had seen Dasan as a shield, a necessary presence that defined the balance within the cabin. Only now did he recognize what her leaving would signify. They shared a meal without ceremony. No toasts were offered, no promises spoken aloud. Dasan finished first, set her bowl aside, and checked her gear one last time. When she reached the door, she paused. "You chose correctly," she said to Isaac, not as praise, but as acknowledgement. Then she turned and stepped out into the morning light. Nita watched from the doorway until her sister's figure disappeared into the low hills beyond the river. She did not cry. She stood quietly, breathing in the cold air, letting the separation settle into its proper shape. When she returned inside, Isaac was waiting. "I will stay," she said simply, but not as someone being kept. Isaac met her gaze. "I wouldn't have it any other way." They spent the rest of the day in deliberate work. Isaac showed Nita where he planned to expand the grazing area come spring. She asked questions, practical and precise, considering the long view rather than the immediate comfort. He found himself answering without reservation, explaining choices he had once made for no one but himself. That evening, as the light faded and the fire burned low, Isaac spoke again. "I don't know what this becomes," he said, "only that I won't walk away from it." Nita considered him carefully. "That's enough." The words carried weight not because they promised happiness, but because they accepted uncertainty without fear. Outside, the valley lay open and indifferent, unchanged by human decisions. Inside the cabin, something had shifted quietly, deliberately, and beyond reversal. For the first time since coming north, Isaac Boone did not feel as though he were standing alone against the land. He had not erased his past. He had not been forgiven for it. But he had chosen, at last, to move forward without leaving pieces of himself behind. The days that followed unfolded without urgency, yet nothing about them felt accidental. Dasan did not return. Word came weeks later through a passing hunter that she had joined a small Apache group moving east toward the higher ground, where water lingered longer and the land offered better cover. The news carried no alarm, no sorrow. Isaac noted the information and let it settle. It felt right that she had gone where her strength and vigilance still served a purpose beyond guarding a single doorway. Nita adapted to the rhythm of the rancho with steady resolve. She learned the land as Isaac had learned it years ago, not as something to conquer, but as something to read. She marked where frost lingered longest, where spring runoff would cut shallow channels through the grass, where cattle favored shade when the sun climbed too high. She did not ask permission to take part in these considerations. She offered them, and Isaac listened. The cabin changed in small, practical ways. Tools were moved to places where both could reach them easily. Food stores were reorganized to reflect planning rather than scarcity. The second chair was pulled from the wall and placed at the table, not as a symbol, but because it was needed. One evening, Isaac found himself standing near the river at dusk, watching the water move around exposed stone. The memory of the morning he had found Nita there returned not with the sharpness of guilt, but with clarity. He understood then that the choice he had made had not erased his earlier failure. It had simply refused to let that failure define every decision that followed. When he returned to the cabin, Nita was inside, mending a length of tack with practiced hands. She looked up as he entered, her expression calm, unguarded. "This place feels different," she said. Isaac considered the statement. "It is." They did not speak of love. They did not frame what they shared in language meant to soften uncertainty. What bound them was not rescue or obligation, but the mutual understanding that neither would retreat when the work grew heavy or the land demanded more than comfort. As winter loosened its grip, the valley shifted, grass pushed up through softened ground. The river ran clearer, faster. The cold that had once threatened life became a memory, replaced by the steady labor of preparing for what came next. Isaac Boone rose each morning with purpose that extended beyond habit. He worked not to keep the past at bay, but to build continuity to ensure that what had begun here could endure. Nita worked beside him, her presence neither tentative nor claimed, but chosen. The rancho no longer stood as a marker of isolation. It had become a place of alignment, shaped by responsibility, restraint, and shared resolve. The land did not bless their decision. It did not promise ease. It remained what it had always been: wide, indifferent, demanding. But within that vastness, a life had taken form, not through grand declarations, but through daily choices made without retreat. And that, Isaac knew, was the only kind of ending the frontier ever truly allowed.